And there was a man who reported out about that meeting. It was at Muroc, M-U-R-O-C. It's sort of near where Edwards Air Force Base is now. It didn't exist at the time in 1956 or 7 when it happened. But yeah, that did happen. And you're spot on in bringing up this point, that when we started detonating atomic and then thermonuclear weapons, everyone knows what an electromagnetic pulse is. What they don't know is that embedded in that is what's called a scalar pulse. And Nikola Tesla was one of the original researchers of scalar electromagnetic. And to make it simple, the light we're seeing or electromagnetic is a wave like this, like a sine wave. And it propagates at 186,000 miles per second. Scalar, or it's also called longitudinal, is a point and a line that goes out, boom, at multiples of the speed of light. But when it's done in an uncontrolled way, it rips the fabric of inter- or transdimensional space-time, which disrupts extraterrestrial communications and transport systems. So when we detonated the first atomic bomb, boom, all of a sudden there were ET vehicles investigating everything we were doing on this planet. Because it wasn't just that we were on a path where we could kill ourselves. We were disrupting other operations that are extraterrestrial. And very few people understand this. Now, there is an FBI document in the archive. I understand once we released it, it became the most viewed document on the FBI website.
Which one?
And it was a memo from Guy Hottel, H-O-T-T-E-L, to J. Edgar Hoover from 1947 from Roswell, where we had those, it turned out 3 ET vehicles that went down. One wasn't found until 1950 or 51. And it's a memo where he said that apparently we retyped it because it's so hard. It's so old and hard to read in the 40s. That when they had a new, quote, radar system that when they switched it on, messed up the guidance systems of these ET vehicles, these discs that crashed. Well, remember, radar is a euphemism for both what you think of radar, where you kind of paint the fuselage. It's the beams that go out and bounce off an aircraft, metallic, come back, and you track it. But radar is used to track, but then embedded in it can be an active system. And so what they had done, they had put a classified, by 47, they knew these ET craft were all around our nuclear facilities. Roswell was the only nuclear bomb squadron in the world, or atomic bomb squadron, technically. It wasn't nuclear yet. Or thermonuclear. It was atomic, like at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But that was the only place on the earth, was the Roswell Army Air Base. And so they were trying to track and knock these things down. So that new radar that's mentioned here hit, and they embedded the scalar signal, and it really, these are all electromagnetic craft. They're guidance systems or propulsion. So it's not like you're hitting them with a missile or a laser. It's these weird directional energy weapons that are cross over into this scalar area. And to this day, when I was over the black site in September, about a month before I got injured, there was these massive electromagnetic pulse generators, but they also have embedded in them. So you can target an object with that, hit it, but you also have the scalar, and that can cause these ET craft to get stunned or lose control and crash. So some of the people I'm working with currently have been on those retrieval teams that are actively still doing that. In fact, one of the sites I went over, and I'll show you this video, that 1 or 2 ET craft per year are knocked down there. And it's very worrisome. Worse is that if a civilian aircraft goes in over that temporary flight restriction area, they knock it down.
Let me ask you this: when we're talking
murder. Here.
Yeah, so, no, I mean, listen, this is weird stuff,
and that's still going on.
Right,
that is still happening today, right now as we speak.
The level of technology. Okay, some of the stuff that we got, 0-point energy, teleporting, like the concept of teleporting. Is that something that's out of the ordinary? Is that currently? Do we have access to it? How long have we had it? Who invented it? Is it being used? What's the worry with that? Why are they not releasing it if they have access? There's a lot of questions with it, obviously.
Well, all of it. I mean, they don't release it. They don't want anyone to know about it. But if you look at the testimony of one of our witnesses, Fred Threadfeld, 1953, he was at a Canadian Air Force base, and they were experimenting with that so-called teleportation. And he said it was so funny. They were using, everyone smoked back then, these big ashtrays, and it would be, an electromagnetic system here, and at the other end of the base, another one. And this ashtray would go, boom, teleport. Now, Einstein, when he said the same particle could be in two places at once, he called it the spooky effect. But really what it is what's called quantum entanglement, where every point in space and time is connected to the other. And if you look up quantum entanglement, that's what this is. But imagine doing that not just with a particle, but with a whole object or a spacecraft. So those experiments were going on also, 30s, 40s, 50s. But when they began to unpack and really have some of the most brilliant minds, I mean, I will tell you, the smartest people I've ever met, with certainly IQs north of mine, have been working on these projects in underground.
So you're convinced teleportation is a real thing?
Oh, it certainly can be done.
When you're reading it, it says teleportation is the theoretical transfer of matter or energy from one point to another without traversing the physical space between them. It is a common subject in science fiction, fantasy, literature, film, video games, and television. In some situations, teleporting is presented as time traveling across space. The use of matter transmitters in science fiction originated at least as early as 19th century. An early example of scientific teleportation is found in an 1897 novel, To Venus in 5 Seconds by Fred Jane. Jane's protagonist is transported from a strange machinery containing gazebo on Earth to planet Venus. A common fictional device for teleportation is a wormhole. In video games, the instant teleportation of a player character may be referred to as a warp. So if that exists...
Well, it does. I mean, how are you going to go from one star system to another? Just bear me with me a minute. If you're in 1% of the way through our galaxy, the Milky Way, is 1,000 light years, which at the speed of light, which you can't go, because as you accelerate the speed of light, you become infinitely massive. So it would be 1,000 years one way, 1,000 years another. So in order to traverse interstellar space, and this was concluded early on by the fact they were here, and we downed some of them, you have to do basically your bending space-time. So visualize this, like a piece of paper. I don't have one, but you have a star system here and we're here. Instead of going in a straight line, even at enormous velocities, like our space shuttle or what have you, through these very high voltage electromagnetic systems that also create gravitational waves, you can bend space-time. So the piece of paper does this. So the 2 points come right here. So you're actually, that's where you get into this whole non-locality in physics and quantum entanglement in an applied setting. So the fact that it's relegated to science fiction is fine. It doesn't mean that it isn't being done, because it has to be. You're not going to be able to travel through interstellar distances in any way during any species lifespan without obliterating, as it were, linear space-time. And it doesn't mean you're not traversing, but you're moving transdimensionally. So let's look at it from the point of view of it's like a quantum hologram. A hologram where, like, if you had a hologram of Marilyn Monroe with her skirt, if you zoomed in on one little part of it, it would have the entirety of her image in it, and then zoom in again and zoom in. So when you're talking about a quantum sort of holographic view of the universe, which is a correct one, then you're not traveling in a straight line. And you're using, however, a whole new area of physics. And this is not going to be in your physics textbook or at MIT. It's in these classified areas. And that's why I tell people, I'd say some of the very smartest physicists and electromagnetic engineers I've ever met work in these projects. And they're in, usually most of the time, they're in a deep underground military base.
I want to read this. In 1993, Bennett proposed that a quantum state of particle could be transferred to another distant particle without moving two particles at all. This is called quantum state teleportation. There are many following theoretical and experimental papers published, researchers believe that quantum teleportation is the foundation of quantum calculation and quantum communication. In 2008, M. Hoda proposed that it may be possible to teleport energy by exploiting quantum energy fluctuations of an entangled vacuum state of a quantum field. In 2023, zero temperature quantum energy transportation was observed and recorded by Kazuki Ikeda for the first time across microscopic distances using IBM superconducting computers that are used by quantum computing? What? So it's already been done as being tested.
Well, it has, but on this small level. I'm just saying that when you cross into these, let's call them these forbidden sciences,
right,
that are been highly classified. I mean, and they were standing on the shoulders of great people. Nikola Tesla discovered many of this phenomenon. There were others. I mentioned the Biefeld-Brown effect with electrogravitic. So what's called electromagnetic gravitic, where certain voltages cause objects to float and change their structure. And I think it has more to do with the magnetic spin. Now, I'm not a physicist, but from what I've studied and learned from people who worked on it, that is what it's really doing. And it causes a magnetic field flux that alters the mass, the actual, not weight, but mass of an object. And then it can float and go up, put against gravity. And that's how you control. If you look at how these objects move, often they've been, like we had one case when I was in France, and we were doing what we call CE5 contact, which is when we attempt to make contact with these objects and these civilizations. And the object was moving over us at 200,000 kilometers per hour. It was tracked by the French Ministry of Defense. And an admiral was there. We were doing a demonstration for them. And it could make a right-hand turn or stop. Now, if you were in a normal vehicle, if you were a pilot in a normal object, your brains would come out of your nose. The G-forces would kill you immediately. So we know that they're able to do that and also control for 1G. In other words, so you're really in an electromagnetic space-time bubble when you're moving like that. And that technology, as I mentioned, began to be experimented with in the 20s and 30s. But by the time the 40s came along and they started in earnest studying the extraterrestrial vehicles, it took a while. And also, it's not just energy and propulsion, it's specialized materials. I have the CEO of a corporation that was working on the skin of one of these, part of the craft. And it was such an unusual crystalline metallic material. And they spent many years and figured out how to fabricate it. So some of the really specialized materials we have that we use have been sort of 2 or 3 steps removed, spun off from reverse engineering, studying extraterrestrial, not just energy and propulsion, but material science. So the material sciences are really interesting. And then the final one, that's the big one, is communication. Because the communication is, Elon Musk would love this with Neuralink, but it's non-local. So their communication systems involve the ability to interface with very well-designed electromagnetic systems that interface with the consciousness field and thought. So in other words, you want to do something to your computer, you just think to it without a wire, without an implant.
I can see that.
Mm-hmm. But think of it. I mean, a thought. What is thought? We have these thoughts, and it's like, hey, what dreams may come. But many people have had these sort of experiences where they've had an out of body or near death. In my case, I met my wife in a series of lucid dreams. I think it's because I'm part Cherokee.
Same here.
Yep, I met her that way.
I met her too at 18 years old.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have our 45th anniversary in a couple months. So what's interesting is that think about a civilization so advanced that aspect of thought and consciousness, without wiring, without something at the speed of electromagnetic, can interface with a device. So in 1991, I wrote a paper, and it was about this. and it was called consciousness-assisted technologies. But it goes the other way, where a technology can assist your own consciousness. So you hear about the CIA remote viewing programs, like Ingo Swann, who was a friend of mine I knew, where they were able to use consciousness to spy on the Soviet Union or what have you, so-called psychic abilities. I mean, it's sort of a loaded term because it's so usually wacky, but that is real. And imagine a civilization so advanced that innate ability is augmented, assisted with technological systems, and the reverse, that their technological systems can interface directly. So when you hear many accounts of these ETs, you'll see they'll touch a console and think to it, and the craft moves and goes. So this is not Alexander Graham Bell using the speed of light electromagnetic.
I think sometimes, you're thinking about somebody, and then boom, 3 seconds later, you get that phone call.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And that's happened, I don't know how many times,
sure,
where it happens. Well, how did this happen?
Right.
What gave you the signal that was coming? What gave you a signal that was taking place? I couldn't pinpoint on what that is.
Oh, I do.
But what is that?
What it is.
Yeah.
Okay, this is why this is beautiful. This gets back into conscious quantum entanglement. So the ultimate non-local entangled field is the conscious mind itself. Ernst Schrödinger, who was one of the fathers of quantum mechanics and particle wave theory in 1908, he said the total number of minds in the universe is one, and that is a singularity. So the real singularity they're looking for is actually the consciousness field. So you and I are speaking right now, and you have your individual self and ego and personality, and I have mine, but we're both awake. And that awake field is a singularity. But we end up closing it off. So if you open, this is what meditation does. Meditation enables you to connect to that deep or transcendent aspect of consciousness that's actually omnipresent. It's everywhere. It's not limited by space and time, which is why people can have experiences of a lucid dream and see something in the future, or an intuition. And I, as a medical doctor, I'm not practicing now, and the nurses knew I used to be able to do this. I would sense if someone had an occult or hidden cancer, and I would just enigmatically order a CAT scan when it didn't seem to be indicated, and it would be in there because I could sense it, see it. So that's something we ought to teach all doctors, by the way, but someday we will. But this is an area that gets into a really controversial part of the work we do, and that is going beyond just sort of the material entanglement to how are these civilizations communicating? Well, it can't be like our cell phone at the speed of light. And it's got to be something that is instantaneous. Well, it turns out through the consciousness field and thought, you actually can connect, bang, instantly across 1 million light years of space, which is really amazing to think about.
Yes, it's a way mind, thoughts, teleport. I don't know if you want to use that word. Could physical things teleport? Could you?
Yes.
At one point, one would say, how am I going to be able to email you to go from here to Australia within half a second? How does that happen, right? What causes that to happen, right? Some of the stuff is way too advanced for the average person to be thinking about. This is why, specific topics like this, we're having this conversation with you. But let me go to the next topic here. So ESG, right? Environmental, social governance. So important that even this net zero, asset managers initiative, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, they're talking about more than 315 signatories with the U.S. dollar, $57 trillion in assets under management. The Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative is an international group of asset managers committed, consistent with their fiduciary duty to their clients and beneficiaries, to supporting the goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 or sooner, in line with the global efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Right.
And to supporting investing aligned with net zero emission by 2050 or sooner. Are these guys noble people, or are they full of shit?
Well, to be honest with you, I think many of them are well-meaning but uninformed. In other words, you're not going to... I have the largest legal allowable solar farm in Virginia at my farm. because the state caps how big it can be. And when our power went out in a snowstorm, we had no heat. We had nothing. It barely, I mean, this is a joke. You're not going to run a planet with 8 billion people with solar and wind. Now, with these zero point, quantum vacuum, these sort of technologies that have been confiscated, patents have been confiscated, what we've been talking about, that would get us there very quickly. But so I think their aspirations may be, in fact, noble, but their methodology is fatally flawed because they're not going to get there with any of the schemes that they're planning now. And that's the frustration here. Now, ironically, I was at a meeting in 2013 off the coast of Australia. It was a group of world muckety-mucks. I was asked to give a keynote at this thing. I think it was 120 people flown in on this island. And one of the people there was the head of international, I think it was International Greenpeace director. He was so hostile to what I was saying because I pointed out that the only way we're going to get to these solutions to clean up the oceans and the air and all this and is to bring out these technologies. And he wouldn't hear of anything except the orthodoxy of wind and solar. And I said, but, have you actually run the numbers on that? You can't get there from here. With 8 billion people, there's not enough energy density or reliability in wind and solar, plus wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun isn't up all the time. And the battery storage needs are ludicrously huge. We have no ability to do that. So the solutions are going to have to come from the high-tech classified sector. Good news to all your children and mine is that we have the solution. The bad news is a bunch of Nazis, and I use that word like petro-Nazi, true fascist, ruthless people are keeping it secret. And I'll just put it on the table. And you're not going to get there by wishful thinking and holding hands and singing Kumbaya. You're going to have to do the heavy lift of getting these declassified. Now, here's another solution. I've made an appeal, if there are people of high net worth, to put together a venture capital fund that would be an angel fund to create an open source R&D lab on this kind of electromagnetic and physics. And I think with the information that we have, that probably in a couple of years we would come out without the government declassifying anything, since most of the government doesn't have access, or these big corporations releasing it, we could bring it out. And if you open sourced it in a multi-centered way, streamed it on the internet, the whole lab streamed, the instant you got your eureka moment, everyone who's an engineer or physicist would have the solution. There'd be no patent, there'd be no intellectual property restriction. That's what I've been proposing that we do. And honestly, if you're actually wanting to spend a fraction, a millionth of a percent of what they're going to spend on this scheme, you'd get to this solution probably in a couple of years.
A question for you. What do you think about Terrence Howard? Did you watch the podcast with him and Joe Rogan?
I did not.
You did not? So you don't see what things he was talking about?
No, I didn't.
There's a very viral interview. Are you familiar with Billy Carson?
Oh, yeah, I know him very well.
What are your thoughts on Billy Carson?
Oh, yeah, I think he's doing some good work. He's here locally. And last year I got the Disclosure for Humanity Award from his organization.
Right. We had him on 2 days ago. I thought it was very interesting. Listen to him.
Very interesting.
Would you say you guys are very similar on some of the ideas and beliefs, or what do you?
Well, I don't know because I didn't see that interview. And honestly, this sounds terrible. I don't have time I don't look at other things much. And I just am overwhelmed. I mean, you take unpack a little bit of what I tell you we're doing. I've with this huge family and flying all over the world and working with all these covert things. I'm not sitting and looking at these things. I wish I could tell you I had.
No, I appreciate that.
I plead my ignorance, and it's not to dismiss anyone. It's just I don't have time.
I want to wrap up on this. I think one of the things you said when I was watching, the Lost Century, right? And at the end, you said you wanted to build a facility that's going to be open source 24/7. You're working on stuff, and there's cameras for other people to see on whatever you're building, right? This whole concept of open source probably became more mainstream when Elon started talking about all our stuff is open source. Open source is a phrase that's been around for a long time, but he just kind of took it to a whole different level with a few 100 million followers. I'm like, oh, what is open source? Let me look into this. So walk me through why, your idea of open source and how that would protect both everyone, why that's a good idea, is it going to get others to look and see, well, what if we can do it better? And what if we can do it better? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, see, that's the beauty of like crowdsourcing information. So let's say you're working on a system and you get stuck because you're having a problem rectifying the electromagnetic frequencies or whatever. If it's open source and it's streamed, you have scientists all over the world, there would be a specialist in there that could pipe in and say, well, try this, right? So you collapse timeframes. Secondly, and this is more important, if you do it secretively, the minute you get that eureka moment, the door is going to get kicked in, the device is going to get confiscated, and you're going to get a national security order on it, or you may get killed. Whereas if it's being streamed and the old saying, the whole world's watching, that can't happen. And the other is that it can't be black-shelved. If a corporation does it, I know people who become very wealthy by having an invention like that, and they say, well, hey, what's your price? Here's $50 million, go buy a Lamborghini. And,
they sold this.
And they sold, and that corporation puts it on a black shelf.
Right.
And it never is seen. Or the patent office. In our archive, you'll see an interview.
Shell did it, right? Shell bought one of the guys for $25 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, happens all the time.
Right.
I've been, since 1991, I've been dealing with inventors that keep having that happen. The other is that if you go the patent route, there is a provision in the patent laws related to this Secrecy Act you talked about. And if you look at the interview we had with Dr. Paul Vallone, who is a physicist who was in the patent office, he blew the whistle that they were doing this. And that we have that. We have that interview with him. He ended up suing the patent office because he was terminated and fired and won a settlement, so he won't talk about it now.
You said Vallone, Paul Vallone?
Yeah.
How do you spell Vallone?
Vallone.
Got it.
Dr. Paul Vallone.
Yeah.
He's a PhD physicist. So, we have all that information. So what I've tried to do is say, over the last 100 years, how has this gone sideways when people have got these discoveries? And so the idea of doing this live on the internet, streamed, backed up, multi-centered, but also where there's no intellectual property or patent attached to it. It's basically you're squeezing the toothpaste out of the tube so fast no one can put it back in, and that I don't think would be so easily frustrated as say someone doing a stand-up, a startup company, and they're doing it secretively, and it's like the next iPhone, we're going to keep it under wraps. That's how you end up dead or getting confiscated. And one of the things that I've found is people don't learn from history. Like if you study this history of these sort of incredible technologies and inventions, you'll see a certain number of patterns. And one of them is this, that people who try to do it, even with the best intentions, but are trying to monetize it at the front end and keep it a secret or a patent or a special sauce, it never gets out to the public, and they never end up getting anything for it unless they take a bribe.
Who was the guy you spoke to, the fellow where you said, look, I'm telling you, make it open source, leak it to everybody. No, I'm not going to do it. I'm pretending. Then boom, he was killed. Who was the guy? You talked about somebody on The Lost Century.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure in that film. There were several people that have had that happen. It's a tragedy.
Was it Thomas Moray or no, not Moray? It was one of the ones you had a conversation with.
I have to look at that. I've dealt with hundreds of these inventors over the years.
Who don't want to give it up, who don't want to make it open
They
source.
make the same mistake over and over and over and over. Well, actually, one of the groups was, the guys who bought all the Stan Meyer. He had a car that was running on water, and that was real back in the 90s, I believe. And but he also, what everyone didn't know, he had a toroidal, a donut-shaped electromagnetic device. Yep. And you'll see a picture of this thing because we were going to try to get that collection because he had died. everyone thinks he was poisoned. We don't know, but he dropped dead suddenly. But there was a group that had a lot of funding from an offshore source who I know now, but we didn't know who they were. And they got all that material and they were studying it, basically reverse engineering Stan Meyer's inventions, including this electromagnetic, it was like a donut-shaped object that was free energy. And it had a national security order on it from way back then, I think from the 80s. And when they got it operational, they were sabotaged. They were a death threat. So I got a call from their big funder, Lord so-and-so, I'm not going to say it on the air because I've kept this confidential, who was providing all the money. And I said, well, I told them, if you do this secretly, when you hit that eureka moment, it works, you're going to run into the mother of all buzzsaws. And they did. And he says, well, what should I do? I said, you need to have them open source this, dump it on the internet immediately into me, and I'll see that it gets to millions of people. They wouldn't do it. They still thought they could keep it secret. They were going to go to another country. I said, dude, you're going to have to go to another damn planet, right, to protect yourself. So the next thing I heard, I think it was more than a dozen of them were killed. And all that everything vanished. And that wasn't that long ago. That was just a few years ago. And, I've seen this happen too often. So everyone who gets dollar signs in their eyes, I'm going to be the next Rockefeller of energy. Yeah, well, here's what's going to happen. Before that occurs, Murder Incorporated is going to kick your door in and kick your ass. Or, they'll offer to buy you out. But you're not going to benefit humanity or the earth. I think it's sort of like when the DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Administration, started the internet. It was them, not Al Gore. And Al Gore claimed he invented the internet. It's funny. But the truth is, DARPA, it's open source, and it spun off thousands of companies, including some that are trillion-dollar companies. I think that if a group did this as angel funders, they would be able to get it out there, and it would spawn a whole new economy. Imagine what could happen in Africa and South America and India, impoverished areas. You would have such a huge uplift in humanity and the economy. Now, as that goes up, there are going to be some people who will go the other way, just like Braille typewriters didn't adapt to the internet age and computers, and so they went the way of all flesh. If you made horse carriages and you didn't adapt to the automobile, you went bankrupt. So, at a certain point, that's just the way technology has to evolve.